Cabbage. A headed cabbage is a leafy green or purple biennial plant, grown as an annual vegetable crop for its dense-leaved heads. It is descended from the wild cabbage, B.oleracea var.Oleracea, and is closely related to broccoli and cauliflower, Brussels sprouts and Savoy cabbage. Cabbage heads generally range from 0.5 to 4 kilograms, and can be green, purple and white. Smooth-leafed, firm-headed green cabbages are the most common, with smooth-leafed red and crinkle-leafed Savoy cabbages of both colors seen more rarely. It is a multi-layered vegetable. Under conditions of long sunlit days such as are found at high northern latitudes in summer, cabbages can grow much larger. Some records are discussed at the end of the history section. It is difficult to trace the exact history of cabbage, but it was most likely domesticated somewhere in Europe before 1000 BC, although Savoys were not developed until the 16th century. By the Middle Ages, it had become a prominent part of European cuisine. Cabbage heads are generally picked during the first year of the plant's life cycle, but plants intended for seed are allowed to grow a second year, and must be kept separated from other cole crops to prevent cross-pollination. Cabbage is prone to several nutrient deficiencies, as well as to multiple pests, and bacterial and fungal diseases. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations reports that world production of cabbage and other brassicas for 2011 was almost 69 million metric tons. Almost half of these crops were grown in China, where Chinese cabbage is the most popular brassica vegetable. Cabbages are prepared in many different ways for eating. They can be pickled, fermented for dishes such as sauerkraut, steamed, stewed, sautéed, braised, or eaten raw. Cabbage is a good source of vitamin K, vitamin C and dietary fiber. Contaminated cabbage has been linked to cases of food-borne illness in humans. Taxonomy and etymology. Cabbage is a member of the genus Brassica and the mustard family, Brassicaceae. Several other cruciferous vegetables are considered cultivars of B.oleracea, including broccoli, collard greens, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, and sprouting broccoli. All of these developed from the wild cabbage B.oleracea var.Oleracea, also called colewort field cabbage. This original species evolved over thousands of years into those seen today, as selection resulted in cultivars having different characteristics, such as large heads for cabbage, large leaves for kale, and thick stems with flower buds for broccoli. The varietal epithet capitata is derived from the Latin word for having a head. B.oleracea and its derivatives have hundreds of common names throughout the world. Cabbage was originally used to refer to multiple forms of B.oleracea, including those with loose and non-existent heads. A related species, Brassica rapa, is commonly named Chinese Napa or celery cabbage, and has many of the same uses. It is also a part of common names for several unrelated species. These include cabbage barker, cabbage tree, and cabbage palms, which include several genera of palms such as Mauritia, Roystonia oleracea, Acrocomia, and Euterpe enocarpus. The original family name of brassicas was cruciferae, which derived from the flower petal pattern thought by medieval Europeans to resemble a crucifix. The word brassica derives from bressic, a Celtic word for cabbage. Many European and Asiatic names for cabbage are derived from the Celto-Slavic root kappa, meaning head. The late Middle English word cabbage derives from the word caboche, from the Picard dialect of Old French. This in turn is a variant of the Old French caboche. Through the centuries, cabbage and its derivatives have been used as slang for numerous items, occupations, and activities. Cash and tobacco have both been described by the slang cabbage. While cabbage head means a fool, a stupid person, and cabbage means to be exhausted or, vulgarly, in a vegetative state. Description: cabbage seedlings have a thin taproot and cordate cotyledon. The first leaves produced are ovate with a lobed petiole. Plants are 40 to 60 centimeters tall in the first year at the mature vegetative stage, and 1.5 to 2.0 meters tall when flowering in the second year. Heads average between 1 and 8 pounds, with fast-growing, earlier maturing varieties producing smaller heads. Most cabbages have thick, alternating leaves, with margins that range from wavy lobed to highly dissected. Some varieties have a waxy bloom on the leaves. Plants have root systems that are fibrous and shallow. About 90% of the root mass is in the upper 20 to 30 centimeters of soil. Some lateral roots can penetrate up to 2 meters deep. The inflorescence is an unbranched and indeterminate terminal raceme measuring 50 to 100 centimeters tall, with flowers that are yellow or white. Each flower has 4 petals set in a perpendicular pattern, as well as 4 sepals, 6 stamens, and a superior ovary that is two-celled and contains a single stigma and style. 2 of the 6 stamens have shorter filaments. The fruit is a calyx that opens at maturity through dehiscence to reveal brown or black seeds that are small and round in shape. Self-pollination is impossible, and plants are cross-pollinated by insects. The initial leaves form a rosette shape comprising 7 to 15 leaves, each measuring 25 to 35 centimeters by 20 to 30 centimeters. After this, leaves with shorter petioles develop and heads form through the leaves cupping inward. Many shapes, colors and leaf textures are found in various cultivated varieties of cabbage. Leaf types are generally divided between crinkled leaf, loose head savoys and smooth leaf, firm head cabbages, while the color spectrum includes white and a range of greens and purples. Oblate, round and pointed shapes are found. Cabbage has been selectively bred for head weight and morphological characteristics, frost hardiness, fast growth and storage ability. The appearance of the cabbage head has been given importance in selective breeding, with varieties being chosen for shape, color, firmness and other physical characteristics. Breeding objectives are now focused on increasing resistance to various insects and diseases and improving the nutritional content of cabbage. Scientific research into the genetic modification of B.oleracea crops, including cabbage, has included European Union and United States explorations of greater insect and herbicide resistance. Genetically modified B.oleracea crops are not currently used in commercial agriculture. History. Although cabbage has an extensive history, it is difficult to trace its exact origins owing to the many varieties of leafy greens classified as brassicas. The wild ancestor of cabbage, Brassica oleracea, originally found in Britain and continental Europe, is tolerant of salt but not encroachment by other plants and consequently inhabits rocky cliffs in cool damp coastal habitats, retaining water and nutrients in its slightly thickened, turgid leaves. According to the triangle of U theory of the evolution and relationships between Brassica species B.oleracea and other closely related kale vegetables represent one of 3 ancestral lines from which all other brassicas originated. Cabbage was probably domesticated later in history than Near Eastern crops such as lentils and summer wheat, because of the wide range of crops developed from the wild B.oleracea. Multiple broadly contemporaneous domestications of cabbage may have occurred throughout Europe. Non-hitting cabbages and kale were probably the first to be domesticated, before 1000 BC, by the Celts of Central and Western Europe. Unidentified brassicas were part of the highly conservative, unchanging Mesopotamian garden repertory. It is believed that the ancient Egyptians did not cultivate cabbage, which is not native to the Nile Valley, though a word short in Papyrus Harris of the time of Ramesses III has been interpreted as cabbage. Ptolemaic Egyptians knew the cole crops as gram, under the influence of Greek crombe, which had been a familiar plant to the Macedonian antecedents of the Ptolemies. By early Roman times, Egyptian artisans and children were eating cabbage and turnips among a wide variety of other pulses and vegetables. The ancient Greeks had some varieties of cabbage, as mentioned by Theophrastus, although whether they were more closely related to today's cabbage or to one of the other brassica crops is unknown. The headed cabbage variety was known to Greeks as crombe and to Romans as brassica or olis biopen. Leafy variety was known in Greek as raphanes and in Latin as cauliflower. Chrysippus of Cnidos wrote a treatise on cabbage, which Pliny knew, but it has not survived. The Greeks were convinced that cabbages and grapevines were inimical, and that cabbage planted too near the vine would impart its unwelcome odor to the grapes. This Mediterranean sense of antipathy survives today. Brassica was considered by some Romans a table luxury, although Lucullus considered it unfit for the senatorial table. The more traditionalist Cato the Elder, espousing a simple, republican life, ate his cabbage cooked raw and dressed with vinegar. He said it surpassed all other vegetables, and approvingly distinguished 3 varieties. He also gave directions for its medicinal use, which extended to the cabbage eater's urine, in which infants might be rinsed. Pliny the Elder listed 7 varieties, including Pompey cabbage, Cumae cabbage and Sabellian cabbage. According to Pliny, the Pompey cabbage, which could not stand cold, bulged taller, and has a thick stalk near the root, but grows thicker between the leaves, these being scantier and narrower, but their tenderness is a valuable quality. The Pompey cabbage was also mentioned by Columella in the Re Rustica. Apicius gives several recipes for colloquially tender cabbage shoots. The Greeks and Romans claimed medicinal usages for the cabbage varieties that included relief from gout, headaches and the symptoms of poisonous mushroom ingestion. The antipathy towards the vine made it seem that eating cabbage would avoid drunkenness. Cabbage continued to figure in the Materia Medica of antiquity as well as at table. In the 1st century AD, Dioscorides mentions 2 kinds of coleworts with medical uses, the cultivated and the wild, and his opinions continued to be paraphrased in herbals right through the 17th century. At the end of antiquity, cabbage is mentioned in Observationa Suborum of Anthimus, a Greek doctor at the court of Theodoric the Great, and cabbage appears among vegetables directed to be cultivated in the Capitulaire de Villis, composed c. 771 to 800 that guided the governance of the royal estates of Charlemagne. In Britain, the Anglo-Saxon cultivated corelle. When round-headed cabbages appeared in 14th-century England, they were called cabaches and caboches, words drawn from Old French and applied at first to refer to the ball of unopened leaves. The contemporaneous recipe that commences take cabbages and quarter them, and seed them in good broth, also suggests the tightly headed cabbage. Manuscript illuminations show the prominence of cabbage in the cuisine of the High Middle Ages, and cabbage seeds feature among the seed list of purchases for the use of King John II of France when captive in England in 1360. But cabbages were also a familiar staple of the poor. In the lean year of 1420, the bourgeois of Paris noted that poor people ate no bread, nothing but cabbages and turnips and such dishes. Without any bread red assault. French naturalist Jean Roule made what is considered the first explicit mention of head cabbage in his 1536 botanical treatise De Natura Stirpium, referring to it as Capuco's coals. Sir Anthony Ashley, 1st Baronet, did not disdain to have a cabbage at the foot of his monument in Wimborne St Giles. In Istanbul, Sultan Selim III penned a tongue-in-cheek ode to cabbage. Without cabbage the halva feast was not complete. Cabbages spread from Europe into Mesopotamia and Egypt as a winter vegetable, and later followed trade routes throughout Asia and the Americas. The absence of Sanskrit or other ancient Eastern language names for cabbage suggests that it was introduced to South Asia relatively recently. In India, cabbage was one of several vegetable crops introduced by colonizing traders from Portugal, who established trade routes from the 14th to 17th centuries. Carl Peter Thunberg reported that cabbage was not yet known in Japan in 1775. Many cabbage varieties, including some still commonly grown, were introduced in Germany, France, and the Low Countries. During the 16th century, German gardeners developed the Savoy cabbage. During the 17th and 18th centuries, cabbage was a food staple in such countries as Germany, England, Ireland and Russia, and pickled cabbage was frequently eaten. Sauerkraut was used by Dutch, Scandinavian and German sailors to prevent scurvy during long ship voyages. Jacques Cartier first brought cabbage to the Americas in 1541–42, and it was probably planted by the early English colonists, despite the lack of written evidence of its existence there until the mid-17th century. By the 18th century, it was commonly planted by both colonists and Native American Indians. Cabbage seeds traveled to Australia in 1788 with the first fleet, and were planted the same year on Norfolk Island. It became a favourite vegetable of Australians by the 1830s and was frequently seen at the Sydney markets. There are several Guinness Book of World Records entries related to cabbage. These include the heaviest cabbage at 57.61 kilograms, heaviest red cabbage at 19.05 kilograms, longest cabbage roll at 15.37 meters, and the largest cabbage dish at 925.4 kilograms. In 2012, Scott Robb of Palmer, Alaska, broke the world record for heaviest cabbage at 62.71 kilograms. Cultivation. Cabbage is generally grown for its densely leaved heads, produced during the first year of its biennial cycle. Plants perform best when grown in well-drained soil in a location that receives full sun. Different varieties prefer different soil types, ranging from lighter sand to heavier clay, but all prefer fertile ground with a pH between 6.0 and 6.8. For optimal growth, there must be adequate levels of nitrogen in the soil, especially during the early head formation stage, and sufficient phosphorus and potassium during the early stages of expansion of the outer leaves. Temperatures between 4 and 24 degrees Celsius prompt the best growth, and extended periods of higher or lower temperatures may result in premature bolting. Flowering induced by periods of low temperatures only occurs if the plant is past the juvenile period. The transition from a juvenile to adult state happens when the stem diameter is about 6 mm. Vernalization allows the plant to grow to an adequate size before flowering. In certain climates, cabbage can be planted at the beginning of the cold period and survive until a later warm period without being induced to flower, a practice that was common in the eastern U.S. Plants are generally started in protected locations early in the growing season before being transplanted outside, although some are seeded directly into the ground from which they will be harvested. Seedlings typically emerge in about 4 to 6 days from seeds planted 1.3 centimeters deep but of soil temperature between 20 and 30 degrees Celsius. Growers normally place plants 30 to 61 centimeters apart. Closer spacing reduces the resources available to each plant and increases the time taken to reach maturity. Some varieties of cabbage have been developed for ornamental use. These are generally called flowering cabbage. They do not produce heads and feature purple or green outer leaves surrounding an inner grouping of smaller leaves in white, red, or pink. Early varieties of cabbage take about 70 days from planting to reach maturity, while late varieties take about 120 days. Cabbages are mature when they're firm and solid to the touch. They are harvested by cutting the stalk just below the bottom leaves with a blade. The outer leaves are trimmed, and any diseased, damaged, or necrotic leaves are removed. Delays in harvest can result in the head splitting as a result of expansion of the inner leaves and continued stem growth. Factors that contribute to reduced head weight include growth in the compacted soils that result from no-till farming practices, drought, waterlogging, insect and disease incidents, and shading and nutrient stress caused by weeds. When being grown for seed, cabbages must be isolated from other B.oleracea subspecies, including the wild varieties, by 0.8 to 1.6 kilometers to prevent cross-pollination. Other brassica species, such as B. rapa, B. juncea, B. nigra, B. napus and Raphanus sativus, do not readily cross-pollinate. Cultivars. There are several cultivar groups of cabbage, each including many cultivars. Savoy, characterized by crimped to curly leaves, mild flavor and tender texture. Spring greens, loose-headed, commonly sliced and steamed. Green, light to dark green, slightly pointed heads. This is the most commonly grown cultivar. Red, smooth red leaves, are often used for pickling or stewing. White, also called Dutch, smooth, pale green leaves. Some sources only delineate 3 cultivars, Savoy, red and white, with spring greens and green cabbage being subsumed into the latter. Cultivation problems. Due to its high level of nutrient requirements, cabbage is prone to nutrient deficiencies, including boron, calcium, phosphorus and potassium. There are several physiological disorders that can affect the post-harvest appearance of cabbage. Internal tip burn occurs when the margins of inside leaves turn brown, but the outer leaves look normal. Necrotic spot is where there are oval sunken spots a few millimeters across that are often grouped around the midrib. In pepper spot, tiny black spots occur on the areas between the veins, which can increase during storage. Fungal diseases include wirestem, which causes weaker dying transplants, fusarium yellows, which result in stunted and twisted plants with yellow leaves, and blackleg, which leads to sunken areas on stems and gray-brown spotted leaves. The fungi Alternaria brassica and Abrassicilla cause dark leaf spots in affected plants. They are both seed-borne and airborne, and typically propagate from spores in infected plant debris left on the soil surface for up to 12 weeks after harvest. Rhizoctonia solani causes the post-emergence disease wirestem, resulting in killed seedlings, root rot, stunted growth and smaller heads. One of the most common bacterial diseases to affect cabbage is black rot, caused by Xanthomnas campestris, which causes chlorotic and necrotic lesions that start at the leaf margins, and wilting of of plants. Clubroot, caused by the soil-borne slime mold-like organism Plasmodiaphora brassicae, results in swollen, club-like roots. Downy mildew, a parasitic disease caused by the omycete Peronospora parasitica, produces pale leaves with white, brownish or olive mildew on the lower leaf surfaces. This is often confused with the fungal disease powdery mildew. Pests include root knot nematodes and cabbage maggots, which produce stunted and wilted plants with yellow leaves, aphids, which induce stunted plants with curled and yellow leaves, harlequin bugs, which cause white and yellow leaves, thrips, which lead to leaves with white bronze spots, striped flea beetles, which riddle leaves with small holes, and caterpillars, which leave behind large, ragged holes in leaves. The caterpillar stage of the small cabbage white butterfly, commonly known in the United States as the imported cabbage worm, is a major cabbage pest in most countries. The large white butterfly is prevalent in Eastern European countries. The diamondback moth and the cabbage moth thrive in the higher summer temperatures of continental Europe, where they cause considerable damage to cabbage crops. In India, the diamondback moth has caused losses up to 90% in crops that were not treated with insecticide. Destructive soil insects include the cabbage root fly and the cabbage maggot, whose larvae can burrow into the part of plant consumed by humans. Planting near other members of the cabbage family, or where these plants have been placed in previous years, can prompt the spread of pests and disease. Excessive water and excessive heat can also cause cultivation problems. Production. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations combines cabbage and other brassicas for reporting purposes. Total world production of all brassicas for calendar year 2012 was 70,104,972 metric tons. The nations with the largest production were China, which produced 47% of the world total, and India, which produced 12%. China and India used a surface area of 980,000 hectares and 375,000 hectares respectively. To grow these crops, the total global surface area used for cabbage and related brassica crops in 2012 was 2,391,747 hectares. The largest yields were from South Korea, which harvested 71,188.6 kilograms per hectare, Ireland, and Japan. Cabbages sold for market are generally smaller, and different varieties are used for those sold immediately upon harvest and those stored before sale. Those used for processing, especially sauerkraut, are larger and have a lower percentage of water. Both hand and mechanical harvesting are used, with hand harvesting generally used for cabbages destined for market sales. In commercial scale operations, hand harvested cabbages are trimmed, sorted, and packed directly in the field to increase efficiency. Vacuum cooling rapidly refrigerates the vegetable, allowing for earlier shipping in a fresher product. Cabbage can be stored the longest at -1 to 2 degrees Celsius with a humidity of 90 to 100%. These conditions will result in up to 6 months of longevity. When stored under less ideal conditions, cabbage can still last up to 4 months. Culinary use. Cabbage consumption varies widely around the world. Russia has the highest annual per capita consumption at 20 kilograms, followed by Belgium at 4.7 kilograms, the Netherlands at 4.0 kilograms, and Spain at 1.9 kilograms. Americans consume 3.9 kilograms annually per capita. Cabbage is prepared and consumed in many ways. The simplest options include eating the vegetable raw or steaming it, though many cuisines pickle, stew, sauté, or braise cabbage. Pickling is one of the most popular ways of preserving cabbage, creating dishes such as sauerkraut and kimchi. Although kimchi is more often made from Chinese cabbage, savoy cabbages are usually used in salads, while smooth leaf types are utilized for both market sales and processing. Bean curd and cabbage is a staple of Chinese cooking, while the British dish bubble and squeak is made primarily with leftover potato and boiled cabbage and eaten with cold meat. In Poland, cabbage is one of the main food crops, and it features prominently in Polish cuisine. It is frequently eaten either fresh or as sauerkraut, as a side dish or as an ingredient in such dishes as golubki and pierogi. Other Eastern European countries, such as Hungary and Romania, also have traditional dishes that feature cabbage as a main ingredient. In India and Ethiopia, cabbage is often included in spicy salads and braises. In the United States, cabbage is used primarily for the production of coleslaw, followed by market use and sauerkraut production. The characteristic flavor of cabbage is caused by glucosinolates, a class of sulfur-containing glucosides. Although found throughout the plant, these compounds are concentrated in the highest quantities in the seeds. Lesser quantities are found in young vegetative tissue, and they decrease as the tissue ages. Cooked cabbage is often criticized for its pungent, unpleasant odor and taste. These develop when cabbage is overcooked and hydrogen sulfide gas is produced.